This is a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station.
Hello, I'm Hanif Baharuddin, and you're tuned into the show that brings you closer to the people and places of our capital city. We've had a few episodes this year that featured Ali Sabrina Ismail, Director of Architecture from the Faculty of Built Environment and Surveying, University Technology Malaysia, talking about concepts relating to urban design and architecture. We've touched on a few topics such as practical mosque architecture, designing cities for the elderly, and the history of housing design and development in Malaysia, among others. In this episode, we're going to get her to reflect on these conversations that we've had throughout the year and discuss how we can continue talking about these topics and make them relatable to the public a lot more.
Okay, thank you so much, Hanif. Thank you again for having me in BFM Radio. There's a lot of topics that we have been discussed in year 2022, and there's been a series of a lot of topics that evolve around public architecture that relating to more towards community and society. But from all the topics that we had discussed, I think the most dearest topic that actually captured and come to my attention is actually the issue of housing in Malaysia. I know in the fifth series that we have talked about the history of housing design and development in Malaysia. But the most crucial part when we relate to cities development, housing is actually the most vital and crucial issue, because we know that in urban cities, namely like in Kuala Lumpur area, the issue of affordable housing shortage is actually very, very crucial. And there's a lot of things when we talk about housings in cities, because when we talk about the supply and demand and housing supply has constantly fallen short, especially in large and in big cities. Yeah. So the big issue here that we need to focus in cities is the way how we live in big cities. Yeah.
Right. I think to a certain extent, I think we've been having this conversation, especially because of your role as an educator, right? So as an educator, it's part of your core duty to impart this knowledge to students. But how can the public, who may not necessarily need to know these things, take in what we've discussed throughout the year to process and help them make sense of the city that they're staying in? You know what I mean?
Yeah, because when we talk about living in a city actually, and how to actually build up a sustainable living kind of environment in the city, it has to go from the ideation of a bottom up approach, not by looking at this, which means that needs to improve a society collaboration at the public level first, and this actually need to involve the decision making process among the society and how things actually inputs and how should they be done. So actually there should be a two-way communication in which from the society up to the policy makers and up to the government. So this is very important actually, where we actually as a society also need to have a connection with the authority and also with the policy makers. And it is very important for us actually to empower, to share a lot of new ideas. And in that sense, when you talk about this, there's a lot of nitty-gritty aspects talking about city living, because now most of people live in cities, in urban areas. And this is quite crucial when we talk about changing lifestyle, economic status, cultural background, because there's a lot of different sets of ideation or ideologies and beliefs that comes into place. So in that sense is that how do we actually going to mix them together in creating a more harmonious kind of city living among the community and among the society, especially in Malaysia itself.
Yeah. Based on your experience, have you ever had to perhaps explain to people about the kind of things that you teach and you think about? Because I think to a certain extent, I know when it comes to talking about architecture, city, urban design and whatnot, and this is something that I think I reflect on as well, because I think we've been doing this sort of like series as well, right, for quite a while now. How do we make these issues closer or more relevant to the people out there who might not necessarily think about these things? You know what I mean? Because I think sometimes, NGOs will champion, activists will champion these things. And I guess to a certain extent, we are one way or another championing these things. But how do we get people to start reflecting a lot more on the cities that they live in beyond the practical issues, I suppose?
I think everyone plays an important role when you talk about community living, from the public, from different genders, age, background, different culture, and things like that. So, but in this sense, I think academicians do play an important role, because when we talk about academician, the nitty gritty, or what you call that, the starting point is that talking about education. So education is very important in developing awareness, especially among the children, going up to the youngsters, and then going up to the youth, and when you go to universities levels and things like that. So when we talk about living in the cities, everybody has a role to play. And education doesn't grow by itself, because and awareness doesn't grow by itself. It has to go to a very long kind of process of development or evolution. And when we talk about education systems, we also need to talk about how do we actually promote knowledge to the society. So in this sense, in promoting a kind of a sustainable, a healthier living environment in a city, and how we need to improve the lifestyle, it has to start from the roots. So when we talk about from the roots, it has to start back to education system itself. So in this sense, we need to do a lot of awareness campaigns, workshops, and educate the public on how to live and create a healthier living environment and sustainable living environment in the city itself. And when we talk about it, if you look in the condition of Malaysia nowadays, the awareness among our society about creating sustainable living environment in cities is quite low. We are there yet, but not there yet. That is actually my point of view, because there's a lot of things that we need to learn. And when we talk about learning, it takes a process. So, which means in this sense is that how do you embedded the values is also important. And when we talk about the values of belief system of different cultures and backgrounds, you need to actually to develop the values, and you actually to train the values and embedded it in our lifestyle, especially in our daily living. Yeah. So that is the most important key point about values is also need to be embedded. Yeah.
Yeah, which means that the I guess the process does not necessarily mean that it needs to be done in a formal way, right? And when I say formal,
Yeah.
I mean via schools, via teachers. It needs to also come from, I guess, families, parents, perhaps, playing their role in actually maybe imparting these. The word that you use is values, right? So
Yeah.
imparting these values to kids as well, right?
So it has to grow from a kind of what we call informal education also, because when children goes to school, it's a formal education where it is some sort of like a structured program or a structured curriculum. But sometimes when you talk about education, it happens, it just happens sometimes when we go and look into in the environment for itself in the cities, like you have some sort like thoughts, or maybe some sort like a trigger in terms of the sense of value, or you talk about sense of empathy in that sense. So the thing actually will trigger your sense of logical kind of mature thinking on how you want to do something that can give benefit back to people, give benefit back to society. For instance, I'm giving you an example. When we go to big cities, there's a lot of leftover spaces or pocket spaces among buildings, or within buildings that is being constructed. But if you go to a lot of Western countries, they actually use these leftover spaces to make it as a production space that actually can generate income, make it as a place for space making, or create the sense of placemaking in society. So this is where the values of valuing greenery life is, especially in cities, is very important. So this doesn't happen a day, because it needs to be embedded with awareness, with the sense of empathy. If you have a sense of empathy of how creating a healthy environment, it will trigger your sense of values. What should be done? What action should you take? And what is your responsibility as an individual in society? So this is what is really, really important, that we need to embed the values of empathy to all generation, means from the children to the kids up until the youth, and then up until the adulthood. Yes, this is it needs a long process, but it can be done actually.
You mentioned some concepts there that I think we have discussed before, which are, I guess, pretty important. These concepts are pretty important to talk about, and I think to a certain extent it's very forward-looking as well, talking about empty spaces, placemaking and whatnot, right? But we have also discussed this year some topics that are in relation to perhaps making the city more inclusive for the elderly, as well as mosque architecture and how important it is to make them more practical for end users, right? So based on your experience, how should conversations like these, which I think to a certain extent they are focusing more on the nitty-gritty aspects of city living and it's very practical, can be discussed a lot more? How do we get people to, I guess, start thinking about very practical issues that I think to a certain extent a lot of people, maybe they have been thinking about these things, but how can we surface these conversations a lot more for the public to start thinking about?
I think one of the thing that we can do in community, like I mentioned previously, is talking about the sense of awareness, where sense of awareness starts from the values of empathy. But then when you have sense awareness, sometimes you cannot work alone, or you cannot actually achieve this as individual, because it has to be in a group. So when you talk about a group, it has to grow within the community itself. And when I talk about within the community building, is that everyone must have a vision. And when you talk about a vision, everyone must have a clear mission and what are they trying to do. So if you look into the issues of pollution in cities, for example, or you look into the problem of housing design, what is your role and what is your responsibility and what is your response that you should take upon it? For instance, if you go into housing development or things like that, you will see there's a lot of problems in terms of the way it was designed, or maybe in terms of the playgrounds. It doesn't show the idea of sense of security and safety. So as working in a group, in a community, maybe it will trigger much sense of responsibility. So this means like you need to work together, like having a lot of campaigns, having a lot of public talks, intellectual discourse, and having a lot of intellectual conversation. So great ideas actually triggers from just a small little conversation, and it can spark into a big vision, and it can go with a lot of mission and strategic planning after that. And it needs to work within that kind of a community development itself. So that's why I say that when we talk about spaces like the design of the mosque and elderly housing, everyone play a role to actually give some feedback or comments. What should we do to give a betterment living for everyone? So if everyone have this sense of consideration, sense of empathy, sense of responsibility, huge change can be made, not only within the society itself, not only within the region, but also within a bigger scope at worldwide also. So this can be achieved if everyone has a very strong vision and mission, like saving planet Earth, for example, or have a lot of greenery spaces in cities areas. So because what I'm saying is that the people, the voice of the people has a strong motivation that can rally the spirit of togetherness, and this one actually can change the society mindset. Yeah.
That was Adi Sabrina Ismail, Director of Architecture from the Faculty of Built Environment and Surveying, University Technology Malaysia, sharing her thoughts on the conversations that we've had about the city throughout this year. We're going to make way for some messages. Stay tuned. I'm Hanif Baharuddin and you're listening to I Love KL on BFM 89.9. BFM 89.9, you're listening to I Love KL, bringing you closer to the people and places of our capital city. I'm Hanif Baharuddin. Alisa Arbina Ismail, Director of Architecture from the Faculty of Built Environment and Surveying, University Technology Malaysia, joins me this week for our final chat for the year 2022. We've been reflecting on the chats that we've had this year and how we can further the conversation on city design, architecture and living, especially for the masses. Here's the second part of our discussion. Let's reflect a bit on city living. If you think about it, city living and lifestyle is, I think, slowly getting a lot more challenging these days, especially with economic recession coming and, climate change. You can argue literally here with flash floods and all. What, in your opinion, are some of the aspects that we should pay a lot more attention to next year, as we sit down and think about the city?
Yeah, 2030 is the big year. Because I think if you read the United Nations goal number 11, they already have listed out a lot of by the year 2030, and what every cities in the world and what every country should achieve. And if you look into their Sustainable Development Agenda, Goal 11 in the United Nations, the one thing that they mention is that to make better cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So when we talk about these 3 or 4 important keywords here, inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, here it means that by the year 2030, all cities perhaps and all places in the world should ensure access for adequate, safe, and affordable, which means affordable, and the most important thing, focusing on housing and basic necessities and basic services. So in this sense, when we talk about all of these basic services and facilities and necessities, it involves everything that relating to the needs of the society. So which means that in this sense, we are talking about sustainable human settlement planning, and where you can provide a lot of services that talk about assessing to safe living, and also give consideration especially to person with disabilities, focusing more on women, on children, and give a lot of equitable access especially to all walks of peoples of life and strata of society. So this is very important, that for the year 2030, I think we need to achieve something. And especially in Malaysia, there's a lot of changes has to be made, especially in the big cities. So, and I think we need to refer back to the Sustainable Development Agenda by the United Nations Goal 11. So, and there's a lot of work to be done. And if you look at that, we need to look back into our public transportation, our living settlements, and also creating a better connectivity and accessibility to all people, especially the society. Yeah.
Do you think that these things can be tackled with all the challenges or some of the challenges that I mentioned earlier? Do you think that we can perhaps work towards that with these challenges around as well?
Yes, definitely, of course. Like what I mentioned before, some things has to be done. We have to make the change somewhere. So, and changes starts with aspiration. And aspiration, it doesn't happen a day, because it starts from issues and problems. So there's a lot of issues and problems happening around us. So if we don't have a clear aspiration, a clear vision and mission on what should we improve in terms of the quality of living and things like that, our economic standards and things like that, we cannot go anywhere. So it starts from just a small thing, but it can make a bigger change. So this is very critical actually. So the participatory of all walks of people actually need to work together hand in hand actually to make a change for a good sustainable human settlement living. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah. So I don't want to be too negative either. So, let's talk about some of the positive things that people can, I guess, get excited by or look forward to, perhaps, in the future in terms of, I guess, when it comes to talking about city development, city living and lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. The thing when we talk about excitement, to me, when we talk about living in a city, number one, everyone needs to live in a comfortable home. Okay, you need to have a good access to decent, affordable housing. And when we talk about that, living is very crucial. So in this sense, it also relate to health and well-being of the people, and also the smooth functioning of economy development. So this is actually the basis that actually can create very strong and stable communities. And when you have a very strong and stable communities with good economic, better economic development, and also you have a good terms in terms of education and educating the society, it will automatically provide a good health outcomes for all walks of individuals, families, and communities. So that's why I said everything starts from the home. It starts from the home, then it goes to the society, then it goes to the region, then it goes up to the country level. So it's a lot of things to be done, I know. But then if we look forward for a future upward kind of a living, I think we can make a change for that one. Yeah.
All right. We've just had our general election recently, and we have a new government that's committed to reform. With the new government comes new expectations and hopes. What are your hopes and aspirations for this new government in relation to city living and city management? What should they focus on?
Okay, okay, that's a very good question actually, Hanif, and a very good suggestion also. So when I talk about that, the thing that I hope actually aspiration for this new government is that in terms of city living and city management is that we need to create and make better cities and human settlement. And in this sense, it really backs to what I said previously: a cities that is inclusive, safe, resilient, and also sustainable. And in this sense, I think the focus keyword is that we need a good access to decent kind of affordable housing. So, which means that because when you talk about housing, it is actually the fundamental to the health and well-being of the people. So, and as you can know, that Malaysia's population by 2030, it will be projecting to reach about 36.09 million people. And this one will increase by the year 2050 to further up to 40.55 million. So, as the number of population number increase in Malaysia, there's a lot of demands for comfortable living also increase, especially in bigger cities. So to me, my hope to the new government is that if it's good to have more increased access to affordable housing, especially for the targeted groups, and also strengthen the planning and the management and the implementation for a better living of public housing, and also encourage a better environment and friendly facilities to enhance livability among all walks of community. So this is very important because to ensure everyone has equal rights who live in the cities, not only in cities but also in the rural areas, to have environment friendly facilities and also a good living environment. Yeah, I think that's my hope.
All right. Maybe before we end, I know this show is called I Love KL, but I can't help but think about other cities in Malaysia as well. Based on your observation, where are other cities in terms of their level compared to KL, especially cities in Malaysia? You know, Penang, Johor.
Okay. To me, when you talk about cities development, the most important thing is talking about economic growth. Maybe different cities have different sets of policies or development goals and things like that in what it really intention to achieve in terms of economic development for the societal well-being and things like that. But to me, whether you are in Kuala Lumpur, whether you're Penang, whether you're in Johor Bahru, when you talk about big cities, it always deal with human settlements. So, and in big cities nowadays, especially you go to Johor, Penang, and other places, big cities, the most big problematic is talking about living settlements. So, affordable housing, especially for household, and the demands of a lot of affordable housing program, that is the main actually key problem that is especially happening in big major cities. So that's why I was mentioning just now is that it's best to increase the access to more affordable housing, especially for targeted groups in city areas. So this is actually crucial in Malaysia now. Yeah. Mhm.
Again, sorry, another question before we end. Um,
Yeah.
what are your hopes for next year, specifically in terms of city living, conversations surrounding cities? Yeah.
Um, Conversation relating to cities, of course, we need to have a lot of intellectual conversation. So, and when you talk about a lot of intellectual conversation, meaning that reaching out to all walks of society. So, and this is very crucial not only for the academician, but also it has to start from public awareness, from school children, from up to different sets of background of peoples from different income groups and things like that. So this basic awareness actually will open up our minds and then will actually give a lot of aspiration and inspiration on what should we achieve and what should we change. Because nowadays everyone live in cities, Hanif. So we work in cities, we live in cities, but and up to some point the cities will become so densely populated. So what happens next? So and what can we actually do within that dense kind of land, and how we're going to live in adequate and safe manner. So these are the things that also we need to look at, yeah, especially in big cities.
You've been tuning in to I Love KL, and that was Alice Sabrina Ismail. She's the Director of Architecture from the Faculty of Built Environment and Surveying, University Technology Malaysia, and we've been reflecting on how we can advance and elevate the conversations that we've had about the city for the masses. That's all we have for this episode of I Love KL. If you miss any part of the show, you can check out the podcast at bfm.my/ilovekl, our app which you can find via Google Play and the App Store, and you can also find this podcast on Spotify. Don't forget to also follow the station on Twitter at BFM Radio. My name is Hanif Baharudin, and you have been tuning in to I Love KL, bringing you closer to the people and places of our capital city. Join us again next week, only on BFM 89.9, the business station.
You have been listening to a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station. For more stories of the same kind, download the BFM app.